All right. Well, I think we can probably get started. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Tori Marra, and on behalf of Outspoken Agency, we'd love to welcome you to another Candid Conversations. This is our third week doing this, and it kind of developed out of this need for connection, which I think we're all probably experiencing right now. And we felt a little bit useless in the sense of, obviously most events are being canceled right now. Some are going virtual, some are postponing. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to connect any of our clients, any of our friends, our family with some of our speakers so that they can really share some of their, not only their expertise, but what they're going through right now, and try to really just stay connected and open, and this idea of sharing ideas and keeping, an open line of communication with each other. So we're so fortunate that Chris and Zach are going to join us today. And we have a special host today. Ashton is with us, and Ashton is my sister. She is a teaching professor, assistant teaching professor at West Virginia University, and she will be taking over as a host and will be fielding your questions. So it looks like everybody is a little frozen, but I think we're good. So Ashton, I'm gonna let you take over. I'm gonna get out of the way, and looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I want to say thank you to Outspoken for the opportunity to do this. When we were told 6 weeks ago that we had to transition all of our teaching to an online platform, one of the first things I thought was, who can come talk to my students? Not physically, obviously, but who can digitally talk to my students? And Zach and Chris were the first people that I asked for. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I'm so grateful that you all are taking the time to do this. And
yeah, we didn't cut our hair for this.
I cut it myself, so I apologize in advance for the random.
Front looks good,
I think you did a pretty solid job. So yeah, our students are really excited for this opportunity to ask you all some questions and to hear some more about your work. I just want to reiterate one more time, for everybody, we have had some questions that have been submitted, and we're going to take questions during the live portion of this conversation. You'll see at the bottom there are lots of options for you. It's that Q&A box where you can submit your questions, and we will try to sprinkle them throughout, but we'll save a good portion of time near the end too. So with all that in mind, I'm gonna turn it over to Zach and Chris to kind of introduce themselves, talk a little bit about the work that we're doing, and then we'll jump in with some questions.
Want to start, Zach?
Sure. I'm Zach. Chris is that guy. And we actually run a nonprofit production company called Optimist. We create films with impact. And so for every film, every documentary that we create, we equally invest in the film and in the impact campaign. Originally, we did not plan out to make films. We're very accidental filmmakers. We were students studying economics, international relations, and kind of fell into storytelling. And so didn't go to film school and have so much to share about, what this kind of untraditional path in the film world is. And through this path, we've actually been able to create now 3 feature documentaries, a number of short documentaries, and we actually create mini docs on Instagram and Facebook almost every week, especially before COVID. So check out our @Optimist on all the social handles. And now through those films, we've actually raised over $90 million for the impact partners we work with, for the communities that we film in, for the subjects of our films. And that's now has helped change over 270,000 lives, which is really how we like to measure the impact of our work.
And like Zach was saying, I mean, the impact side is why we started in this work and kind of became filmmakers. We were economics and international relations majors in college, worked in microfinance and international development for many years, and then have started using storytelling as a way to make a difference in the world around us, and to learn about and understand issues from, how innovative the extreme poor are, which was our first film, Living on $1, to what life in a refugee camp is on the border of Syria and Jordan for our second film, Salam Neighbor, and then the one that we're going to talk to you guys about a little bit more today, which is our first time talking about publicly, is our newest feature documentary, 5 Years North. And that's about an issue of immigration. And so that film, we'll talk to you a lot more about, but it follows a young undocumented boy and the ICE agent, immigration agent, that patrols his neighborhood. And it's this dual narrative of the two of them here. On the left there is Luis, a close friend of ours who we first met in 2010. He was 7 years old when we met him while we were filming Living on $1. So you can see him there on the right. And then on the left, some of you guys who have seen Living on $1 will remember Chino, who have also been we'd go back each year to visit and film with everybody in this community since 2010, kind of watching as, they grew up from these shy kids to kind of, outspoken social teenagers as they are now. I think we have a photo of what they look like today. So quite the change, the hairstyles have really changed, especially. What was that?
A lot more gel.
A lot more gel, seriously. And long story short, in 2017, we got a phone call that these two had a really worrying phone call that they made the decision to go north and make this really harrowing journey. And I think it was, in many ways it wasn't surprising. On one side, all these influences from them seeing on social media pictures of what life in the US is like, and then even in their community having these houses pop up from actually people who had gone to the US and then were sending money home. They were building these mansions around the community of Peña Blanca, Guatemala, and right next door to these very impoverished small shacks of people living on under $1 a day. So just visibly, they could start to see what life could be like if they made the journey to the US. And then, second, Luis, was really struggling to even put food on the table for his family, a lot of debt, 8 brothers and sisters, very limited work opportunities, unless you go to the gang-controlled city of Guatemala City. So in many ways, I think Luis felt like he had no choice but to leave and go north.
And so this is a picture of his first day in Manhattan. And as you can imagine, coming from a super rural, indigenous Mayan community, Luis was just fascinated with tall buildings. And it was an amazing experience to be with him on that first day when he's navigating New York City. This was even before he's kind of even navigating much of the immigration system. He had just come from 2 months of detention. He had been caught at the border, and as a minor, he's only 16, he had been released to his uncle in New York City. And so this is his first kind of moment just in Times Square, in the city. It's actually the opening scene of our film. And it was just this whole new world. And so the film really starts at this moment on Luis's first day in New York, and then it ends up following him over 3 years as he kind of navigates this system. And Luis works from as a bike delivery, delivering food, and he works in the food industry. So, there really has never been a more relevant moment to understand Luis's story as this essential part of New York City, of what powers these cities that many of us live in. And I think that's what we really hoped that the film could do, was really go deep and not necessarily have Luis speak for all immigrants, but really understand how the immigration system affects one person. And the film also covers a few other characters that we'll dive into, but I think, we're really grateful that we were able to finish the film before COVID, and it world released at Full Frame Film Festival virtually, and it will be in a number of other festivals that we'll be announcing. So if you follow us on social or our newsletter at optimist.co, we'll be announcing some opportunities to actually see it. I think we're grateful that it's coming out now, because in 2020, this story has never been more relevant, especially as we're going through a crisis like this.
Can I jump in here for a second? Because I think before we move on from Luis, there's a really good question that was submitted. They're asking if you can compare the quality of life for a young person in Guatemala to an undocumented young person living in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, and the film really explores this too. We decided, to film continually with Luis's family in Guatemala throughout the film, as well as Luis in New York City. So you can kind of be jumping back and forth between these storylines and get to feel and see those differences yourself throughout the piece. But I mean, I think one of the first thing that really struck us was the difference between what Luis's perception of what life in New York was like versus the reality once he actually got here. And why his perception was so strong is obvious in many ways. I mean, he's watching television shows and commercials about life in the US on his phone. He's seeing Facebook posts from people, even his friends who have gone north. And in his mind, the US was only good things, right? It was only the new shoes and big buildings and this amazing lifestyle, because I think, as all of us do, we curate the best versions of ourselves that we put on social media. And I don't think a kid, a young undocumented boy, does any different when he goes to New York from Guatemala. And so when he arrived, both these boys arrived, I think it was, a reality check after, a month there, that a couple things. I mean, they were living in, a 1-bedroom apartment with 8 of them in one room, on bunk beds stacked, sharing beds, 2 or 3 to a bed. It was pretty tough living conditions on that front. I remember sleeping on the couch there one night as we were shooting, and, I had a cockroach run right over my chest while I was, sleeping. And, it was definitely, really tough living conditions on that side. And then 2, I mean, from the work angle, Luis is working and doing delivery, they're working around the clock. Still, with that said, Luis's life in New York, I mean, his access to food, to basic human needs is significantly higher than it is in Guatemala. And I think he's able to send money back and help his family survive in a way that, is hard to argue with somebody's decision when you understand why they were making that decision.
Yeah, and I think especially coming from a rural community where really the only opportunity is farming, and it's very subsistence farming. His family doesn't own a lot of land, so there is very little opportunity for him. Really, as a young man, the only opportunity is to go to Guatemala City, which is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. There's tons of gang violence. Chino, actually, his cousin and main character of Living on $1, had been working in Guatemala City for the last 5 years at least. And I mean, it's grueling, you're living, Chino was living with his boss, they're selling dog food in a little tienda, in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city, what are known as red zones, where the police will hardly ever even go to. And he was still in massive debt. He's basically indentured slavery in some ways. So when we're shocked by how much a kid like Chino, who was 19 when he came, or Luis, who was 16, how much they're working in New York City, it's not necessarily worse than the situation they would be in New York City. Luis is interesting, and why we really focus on him, because as someone who was caught as an unaccompanied minor and then released to family, he was in the system. Through the film, you watch him as he navigates the legal system which is, I mean, it's more complicated than the tax code. So for us, even understanding the legal system, we had to talk to experts and just wrap our heads around what was available. As a kid, you're not guaranteed a lawyer. In the immigration system, no one's guaranteed a lawyer. So you have these, we would even go to immigration court and see 6-year-olds representing themselves in front of a judge. I mean, it's shocking. And so for Luis, as someone who, his native language is Cachiquel, he learned some Spanish in detention, in immigration detention, and then came to New York to navigate the legal system. It was wildly overwhelming. He was then enrolled in school, which was, he hadn't been in school since 3rd grade. The film really kind of shows you how someone navigates these different obstacles.
I think it does a really great job of that, actually. It really, that kind of back and forth that you show between his life in New York and what his family is experiencing at home, it is just such an incredible way to feel like you are really part of his story. You all did a fantastic job with that. And then we add this layer on top of it of somebody who is working in immigration enforcement that gives us an understanding of also kind of both sides of that legal system too.
Yeah, and I think so. For those of you, who haven't heard about the story yet, it's for who joined a bit late, we've got a new feature documentary, 5 Years North. It follows this young boy, Luis, who Zach was talking about, is an undocumented minor, and then an ICE agent, immigration police agent named Judy, who actually patrols his neighborhood. And for us, Judy came about pretty organically. We were following Luis at first, and then realized very quickly that ICE was such a big impact and influence on his life and on the life of any new arrival in New York City. And so we applied with ICE to get permission to film. And it took about a year to get permission to film with an agent, because we didn't want to do just a typical single day ride along, get a couple agency talking points and move on. We wanted to actually balance the intimacy and the personal nature of the relationship we had with Luis, knowing him for so many years and kind of full unfettered access with a story that had a similar level of access. So we got to meet Judy and actually spend multiple years kind of filming with her, not only out in the field, but film with her family eating dinner, and get to understand her family dynamic. She's a really interesting person who is a first-generation immigrant herself. Her mother has been working for 42 years resettling refugees. Yet she herself decided to work for ICE, for immigration police in New York City. And her parents don't approve of what she does, which created a lot of interesting kind of conversation, family discussions over dinner, and conflict in her own identity and her own work. And then I think most importantly for Judy, what she really struck us, why we really loved her as a subject, was she was willing to be extremely candid and go beyond the ICE talking points. So she, as an ICE agent, was very critical of the agency and talking about how it can be improved. And I think hearing that from an ICE agent to us, who's in it, she's been there for 16 years since the day ICE was formed. She was there and has seen the evolution of the agency and has seen their priorities shifting away from just high priority criminals to as many undocumented people as you can possibly arrest, including non-criminals. And it's flooded their desks with hundreds of thousands of cases that they can't go after. And it's made it so that she really disagrees with some of these policies that ICE is doing. And I think there's a lot to be learned from and exploring and understanding personally why Judy makes the decisions that she does, even though they were incredibly enraging, often insanely heartbreaking to be a part of and film with. They challenged us and I think added something that, hopefully Ashton, for you, having just seen it, brought another level of nuance to the film.
And of course, as filmmakers, it brought up a lot of, questions about our role and how we, it took a lot of time to figure out how these stories are edited together. And what in many ways we're not trying to juxtapose their own experiences, but I think both of them illustrate how the immigration system is so broken in very different ways. And each of them are able to comment on it in their own very unique path. We've made a very conscious choice not to include experts or anyone that was outside of kind of their own world. So the film is very personal and really goes deep. Just like Luis doesn't represent all immigrants, Judy definitely doesn't represent all ICE agents. And I think we did a lot of things also just to note for Luis, that's not his real name. We worked with his immigration lawyers. We never show locations. He's moved since we've stopped filming. So we've done a lot of things to make sure. I think, just to be clear, Luis safety was always the kind of top of mind for us. And we've worked with his family for many years to make sure that they were not only comfortable, but proud of what they're doing. He actually joined our Q&A at a festival we're about to release it. And so we'll have a little bit of his response to the film as well. But I think this film, for us, it's been a tricky, as storytellers who might be listening, it can be incredibly tricky to figure out how to, intertwine multiple story arcs that don't necessarily intersect. So Ashton, I'd be even curious to hear how you felt we accomplished that because it can be so tricky.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Ashton.
Oh, well, we can keep talking. I think we might have lost Ashton's feed.
Well, we have a question on the side that we can answer quickly because we don't have access to the other questions. We do to the chat feature on the side here, but how these two young men are doing in light of COVID-19. So Luis and Chino are both still in New York. And we just talked to Luis yesterday, and he's not currently working. So they've decided to step back. They're not even doing delivery work right now because of the risk of disease and the risk of COVID. Some are still doing kind of one-off seamless kind of things just to keep themselves afloat. But the hope is that they'll be going back soon because I think an area that I think will get more coverage soon, and we've started to see some writing about, is the impact on remittances going back to countries like Guatemala. That if Luis is making a lot of money in New York and sending it back home and paying off debt back home, and if he's not working in New York, what will the trickle-down effect be of that onto families all over the world, where for many countries, remittances can be 30% of the economy in these really large ways. So I think as the months stretch on, we'll start to understand more what those trickle-down effects are. Oh, it looks like Ashton's back.
So sorry.
No problem.
Decided it was too much work for it, right in the middle.
We were just asking you on your perspective of how you thought we balanced the narratives of bringing in Judy and Luis in the film.
Yeah, I think so. It was an interesting experience because you feel so much for Luis and his experience, I think, through this film, and you want to think Judy is wrong and the work that she's doing is wrong. And I don't know that you can feel that way. I think that Zach's point, he was making about how the system in general is just broken and not working. That comes through very clearly, I think, especially in Judy's perspective, because she says that. She openly says that this system doesn't work well. And there are some really heartbreaking moments in her storyline that you are devastated by. but you, at the end of the, I think at the end of the day, still have compassion for the fact that she made this decision. She took this job. She continues to do this work because just like Luis and just like his uncle, she has to provide for her family. And it's not ideal and it's not the best work, but it's the way that she is able to do that. So I think the juxtaposition of the two stories, like you guys said, it's not that they are necessarily intertwined, but thematically, I think they are very much intertwined and overlapping. And there's a moment near the end of the film where you all follow Luis and his cousins, to play soccer, and there's great like underwater video in the pool. And I just remember that thinking at that moment that they were able to show such happiness and experience such joy in such difficult situations. And Judy is trying to do the same. She is experiencing those difficult situations in a very different way, but is doing so to show happiness and to find joy with her family. So it was tough to watch in several moments. It was tough to watch, but also just really compelling and really fascinating.
Yeah, one of the
questions from the audience too, and see what are people
one of the
interested
questions on the side here is, what was one of the hardest things to film? And I think you just got at that, right? So, we wanted to be very careful when filming an ICE agent not to just tell the story from that side, but also from the side of the people that are being arrested. So on those moments when we had access to arrests, Chris was filming with the ICE team, but I was actually filming and following up when appropriate with the families who were being directly affected. So in the film, you actually see both sides of a phone call of a father who was arrested and is being deported. And it is in that moment, it actually challenges a lot of, it's the moment when Judy's kind of black and white view of immigration is challenged. And I think that's why those moments were so important, because I think what we came away with in immigration is nothing is black and white, especially in a system that is fundamentally not serving anyone. And it was by far the hardest moment to film. I mean, for both of us, being in the room when a family's hearing that their father is never going to come home. I mean, so there were some moments in the film, like you said, that are very, very difficult. And that by far was the hardest moment for us to film. The other, I think, I see a Q&A here too. It's starting to pop up on the actual Q&A feed. How has life changed for Luis's family? This is a really interesting part that was actually it was hard for us to grapple with as filmmakers, where we could pop between Guatemala and New York, whereas Luis, as the undocumented immigrant, could not. So even when serious events were happening in his life that we were able to go back to Guatemala for, in his community's life, his family's life, Luis had to watch that through his cell phone, basically. And it was almost, I don't know, I think we almost felt a bit guilty, or to be able to go and be part of those moments when Luis couldn't. And, his family, in a lot of ways, like, truly has benefited from Luis's being in the United States. They were at the very subsistence level, constantly in and out of debt. And Luis's father actually tried to come to New York City before Luis came, but he was turned away, and so his family was already in debt. And basically, Luis has dug them out of that, with many consequences for Luis's own mental health and stuff. But their lives have radically changed because of his choice to come to the United States. And we were able to see that very intimately, and something we really wanted to show throughout the film. But I think they are still missing Luis. I mean, there are moments in the film when things happen that, you know, that Luis should be there. And it is one of those truly heartbreaking realities of undocumented life in the United States, is that that's just not possible. And it's something that, yeah.
And it's a theme that the film explores. And the reason actually we've named this film 5 Years North is because many of the other people in this community, and as well as Luis, the plan is to come for 5 years, make enough money to save up and actually get their families out of debt, maybe have an asset like a truck that can make some money, own their own land that can make some money, and then go back and live in Guatemala and be with family. And I think what's fascinating is when you look at, you know, a lot of research from the Mexican Migration Project or others, you know, this migration throughout history has been very seasonal or cyclical. It hasn't been this process of coming and staying for forever in many ways. I mean, obviously everything is nuanced, but we'd seen a lot of fluidity of movement. And as, you know, really border security started ramping up in the early 2000s, late 90s, we started to see the more and more investment in border security. In many ways, it's kept people in the country because it's very difficult to pop back and forth seasonally to meet labor needs in the US and then go home and be with family, because you're spending sometimes upward of $10,000 for a smuggler to bring you across the border. And the amount of time it takes to pay off that debt and actually make enough money to have it be worth it, you know, is this 5-year calculation that Luis, his uncle, and many of these other guys are making.
And I just want to note really quickly before we take the next question, because I watched the films in reverse. I watched I watched 5 Years North, and then I watched Living on $1. There is, through your all's experience, and that is that Living on $1 is very different from 5 Years North in that it's following you. The two of you are characters in that film. You choose to go to Guatemala and live this lifestyle and experience it firsthand. And I think that in 5 Years North, I got an understanding and an appreciation for the difficulty of the families that you visit with in Guatemala. But there was a new level of understanding after I watched Living on $1 that came to and added to the perspective, I think, of 5 Years North, that the two kind of hand in hand really give this complex but all-encompassing picture of what life is actually like and why they are working so hard, why they are taking the risk to make this journey, why they are taking on that debt with a smuggler and living this lifestyle and working so many hours in New York City. It really changes. I don't want to say changes. It really adds to that perspective that we get in the film.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is these choices that we make as storytellers or as filmmakers or journalists or whoever of how to tell these stories. And it's something that we think a lot about because they're kind of huge decisions that you need to make from the beginning. And I think starting from the very beginning, we always start with what we call these like, wait, what moments, right? Like these, you know, knowing that we're going to spend at least probably 4 years with a feature documentary, you know, we kind of look for these stories or people or topics that give us these kind of like core reactions, like truly just like in your gut, because you kind of lose that perspective as you get deeper into these stories. With Living on $1, you know, we were sophomores in college. We went to a conference talking about poverty and microfinance and development, all this stuff, and we heard the statistic that 1.1 billion people live on less than $1 a day. And obviously, Chris comes from Connecticut, I come from Seattle. We had no concept for that reality. And, you know, these statistics really are kind of meaningless, right? 1.1 billion, what does that even mean? And in college, you know, we weren't planning to make a film. We just wanted to understand at a much deeper level. So we spent our summer vacation living under $1 a day for 2 months in this rural village in Guatemala, and went there just to basically, like Chris said, understand how the extreme poor are innovative enough to survive at that level. And we were pretty blown away by that experience. So we ended up in that film because our story was very core to the experience itself, and we tried to cut a version of the film without us in it. It definitely fell flat, and we realized that we were a vehicle for moving viewers and the story from kind of our experience into the experience of our neighbors, like Chino, like Rosa. And so when we do use ourselves, we're both in Living on $1 and Salam Neighbor, there has to be a very, very good reason. And with every character you choose, because, we film hundreds of hours of footage with many different characters, deciding the very, people that we focus on, it has to serve the story. So you'll find very quickly in the edit process or in the writing process or the review process when a character isn't serving the kind of like core narrative. And something you just got at, right, is that you only have 90 minutes in a film or even less, and you can only cover so much. So 5 Years North isn't able to dive extremely deeply into the reality of living in Peña Blanca, but Living on $1 does. And so we're able to I think as our even understanding of filmmaking and story has changed, we really wanted to make sure that each character serves the story.
And that's so hard when you have you have sometimes 300, 500, 800 hours of footage like we did for this feature film that's, stacks of hard drives that takes, months just to even watch it all. And that's where you have to come back to kind of two techniques that we do. One is you have to really trust your gut the first time you watch something of how it makes you feel. Because it's not about what it was like when you filmed it, because there are so many other factors that happen that aren't captured on camera, right? There's past relationships we have, there's other conversations we had with people, but if it isn't captured on camera, then, and it doesn't move you when you watch that piece back later, then maybe it isn't as powerful to an audience. And so you have to really trust your gut on that. And then two, as Zach said, one of the real keys, I think, is being willing to be really cutthroat down to what is the core themes that you're trying to explore. And if it doesn't authentically support that, then it's not worth making into the film. Even if it's fascinating, even if it's something, really, really interesting to you, it doesn't fit this film. And we've actually found that what we've done many times to make us feel better about this is we'll make a film and then we'll take all the extra footage and other stories that are really interesting and make other films or other series. So with Living on $1, we actually created like an 8-part education series specifically tailored to teachers that kind of combines storylines that didn't make it into Living on $1, but with hand-drawn animations to kind of explore issues like clean water more deeply, or the role of disasters and emergencies in life and extreme poverty. And then with 5 Years North, we've actually spun off 2 films off of that. One was one that you watched recently, which is about an undocumented lawyer in California. And
we're supposed to be at Tribeca with the film right now, so
I know that film got into Tribeca. We're supposed to be there. Actually, we have a screening tonight at 6 supposedly, but it's canceled. But I still see them on my calendar, and it crushes my heart every time. But in that story, she was we met her because she was helping to advise on Luis's case, and we thought maybe she'd fit into this feature film. But she wasn't the right fit for that, but we spun her into a short 19-minute documentary. And then we have another one that we're editing now because we can't go shoot new films during COVID. It's really difficult to obviously be doing new production. We're not at film festivals, but we have all of this footage. So we're editing together another story in the footage that, see what's there.
So I want to spin off from that into the one question that I ask anytime I have a guest speaker who's in front of journalism students. I think sourcing and building source relationships is one of the hardest things to teach, and is often, I think, maybe undervalued by journalism students as they're heading into this field. And you all have made it very clear that sourcing, keeping in touch with those sources, building relationships, I mean, that's, from my perspective, that's what makes the work that you do possible. Can you talk about the importance to that in your work, and how you go about building relationships and sustaining relationships?
Yeah, I mean, so in filmmaking, access, documentary filmmaking, we call it access, right, is the most important part of the process. So, we'll explore so many ideas, and, there are so many people who just don't want to share their story or don't feel comfortable. And, we'll be very clear about that in the beginning, and you just kind of have to move on. I think so there's many ways that these moments and kind of access happen, and it's all about relationships, like you said, right? It's all about developing, and I think what we try and do is just be as honest as possible from the beginning, with our intentions for the film, with how it's going to affect their life. It's not like we just sit down and say this all at once, but we just don't want to, because it is like a 4-year relationship or many more years. And from the beginning, you want to be clear, because it can have big consequences, both good and bad, for the characters of these films. Our first film, Living on $1, has now raised almost, over $1.5 million for this community in Guatemala, for new schools and microfinance and all this stuff. And so they are powerful tools. I think,
talk about how we decided to make ourselves separate from that, so that it doesn't change the relationships.
Oh yeah. So, but it comes down to relationships again, right? So for us, the goal is always just to be as personal as possible. And because it is a very one-on-one relationship where you're kind of exchanging trust, and, like, just being vulnerable yourself helps other people be vulnerable to open up, which is all that documentary filmmaking is finding those moments when people are willing to be real on camera and true about their emotions. And so we've been very careful to never, like, all the money that is donated by the amazing audience members who see the films on Netflix or Amazon or wherever, it goes directly to the nonprofits. We're not, like, tied to that money. We want to make sure our relationships kind of stay true to what they are. We're not the ones that are dispersing sponsorships. We always work, we're not reinventing the wheel. We always work with nonprofits that have worked in these communities for many years, because it does come down to these relationships and storytelling. It's everything. And really, I think honoring the sacrifice that people are making to tell their stories often is really important. Just recognizing that it's a lot of their time, that you have to be very brave to, like, be vulnerable in front of people, especially now, because it's not like documentary filmmaking in the 80s where most likely your friends will never see the film. Now Netflix and social media makes it so accessible that people are hyper aware of the camera. So it's really tricky to make sure that people are natural. I think, part of, what we do, we spend a lot of time, we have the privilege. I think journalism is a little bit interesting because you have to tell a story and move on. And I'm actually kind of curious the differences between documentary filmmaking and kind of written journalism. For us, we have the privilege of spending years with people. We always show them the films before we release them publicly. So Judy's seen the film, Luis has seen the film. I saw a question in here, around, has she seen consequences for speaking out? She was very aware of what we were putting in the film before we even sent it to her bosses, and so you know, it hasn't had consequences on her. She's a grown up. She knows how to navigate that. But, you know, making sure that we're, you know, that it's really, our characters come first for us in many ways, you know, protecting Luis's safety, making sure that he's comfortable in the process, making sure that Judy's comfortable. So it's a really good question. You know, you kind of, I don't think we often vocalize this part of the filmmaking process, but those relationships are everything.
I want to ask one of these student questions. It says, how has your perspective and understanding of this topic, and I think she's referring to 5 years north, so of immigration, and about life for people from these different demographics changed for you guys throughout the filmmaking process? How has that changed how did that change the trajectory of the film through its production? So how did your perspective and understanding of immigration change, and how did that impact the film?
I mean, I think from the beginning, we didn't set out to make an immigration documentary. So we were really starting from ground zero, right? I mean, we got this phone call that these kids that we knew had decided to go north, and they were lost in the desert. And it was like, okay, that's where we're starting from. Why did they make that decision? Where did they go? What happens next? It kind of sparks all these questions, and you just start running with it and learning more along the process. And I think how it's shifted our perspective, I think we've learned that immigration is just so nuanced, so layered, that no one film or no one answer could kind of come in and fix this problem or tell you exactly what the solution is. And that informed how we made the film and why we decided to go with this really personal approach of these two characters, no experts on camera, and just allow you to delve really deeply into the personal motivations, struggles, lives of two individuals who are inside of this broken system. And to us, that was more illuminating to help us understand, and hopefully if it was helping for us, help others understand kind of and empathize with why this system is broken and why it needs to change. And so, you know, because we started from ground zero on the issue of immigration, we can kind of use ourselves even as kind of what were the questions that we've been asking throughout this. And I think if we were asking them, others were asking them too.
And it's been such a cool process because, you know, it's not just us making this film, right? Chris and I, you know, Alejandro Valdez Rochin is our editor. You know, he's an immigrant himself coming from Mexico. It's such a collaborative process that we were not only learning from the experiences of Luis and Judy, but also from Alejandro, from our consulting editors, from, you know, our executive producers, it's like this incredible immersive opportunity to see this angle from so many different lenses. And it's why, you know, Chris mentioned The Undocumented Lawyer, which is another one of our films. For our strategy, basically, as a nonprofit production company, is to start with a feature film and build an ecosystem of content around it so that it's useful for a viewer who might be, you know, curious about one element and be able to dive into different pieces. I know you saw our virtual reality 360 film, For My Son, and that came from, you know, we made this feature documentary, Salam Neighbor, where we were living in a Syrian refugee camp for a month, and there was this huge world of refugees outside of it that we weren't able to dive into. So we went and did a huge project for Google on the front page of Google. We did, you know, this virtual reality film for the Holocaust Memorial Museum called For My Son. You know, these things lead you in so many different directions. And so for us, it's been so eye-opening about immigration. I mean, fundamentally, our immigration system is broken, and true immigration reform needs to happen. There are examples of systems, you know, in Australia that are much more adaptive, that are much more, you know, adaptive to the needs of our country, of these people who are literally, you know, right now is such a interesting moment where in California, essential, like, immigrant workers who are working in the fields in Central California are being called essential workers, yet are still have the threat of being deported. And this idea that the government labels them essential workers and yet they're still have the threat of being deported is this crazy paradox. And the problem with immigration reform is that it's not a reality right now. So we've also learned through this process that there's no way with the current Congress and president that is going to happen. So for us, we also saw that, one, we need to elect people who will pass immigration reform. It's actually a bipartisan issue in many ways. It's not like just one side wants immigration reform. So that's kind of the first step. But we also saw through Luis's side that these little actions, these little steps do make a big difference. And we've actually partnered with this incredible organization called The Door in New York. They serve over 11,000 youth, just like Luis. Not all new arrivals are immigrants, but many of them are. And they provide mental health services. They provide these wraparound services and spaces for kids like Luis to get legal support, to get mental health services, these things that are so important in a system that is broken. And so, it's really, it's something that's really important to us when this film releases. If you go to optimist.co and eventually 5yearsnorth.org, we're building out a full impact campaign that we're really excited for people to be a part of and to create these things and help create change that will fundamentally change people's lives like Luis's.
So we've had a couple kind of COVID questions. One in particular, Guatemala has been highlighted as a country with poverty, gang problems, economic hardships, needing remittances. I'd be curious what your perspective is on the Guatemalan response to COVID-19 as compared to the US response. And I'm going to add to that, if you've had any connection with kind of your sources and how this has been impacting them and their families directly, we'd love to hear about that.
And yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Scott too, who asked that question. Scott, you are in the credits of the film as a translator. So, Scott helped us along the process that, again, like we said, we have 800 hours of footage, so much of it that needs to be translated and transcribed and put into our editing software so that we can actually.
How many translators did we have?
So we had about 64 translators that worked on the film, and a number of them were Spanish to English translators, and then the hardest ones were Cachiquel to Spanish and to English translators, which is the local Mayan dialect. So I think we spoke with every fluent Cachiquel and English speaker we could find on planet Earth.
And it's such a cool time too. Like, so many of these translators were throughout Guatemala. We had an incredible Jorge here, working with over 60 translators. I mean, it's pretty, and all through, YouTube, and it's just amazing process to be able to create a film like this.
To answer your question, honestly, I don't know that much about how Guatemala has been handling the response from a macro level. I haven't been following the policy. Maybe Zach knows a bit more, but to answer on the kind of the personal side, I was just talking with Anthony, who some of you guys, I know Douglas and Kathy, and some of you guys know from Living on $1. He's currently out of work because he works at a hotel in the local tourist town. And so he's now come back. He's working in the fields and kind of doing things like he's planting trees, doing different things around kind of like building up on his own land and doing what he can to get by. There's no COVID in the community of Peña Blanca yet, at least according to him. But it's absolutely affecting the markets and job opportunities, where the best jobs there were tied somewhat to the tourist market, being able to go work in a hotel as a cleaner or a driver or something on that side. So, obviously COVID's affecting all of us. And like I said at the beginning of this, there's going to be these trickle downs of how it's impacting global development goals, whether that's, across all these indicators of health, employment, and clean water. I mean, everything is going to be affected on this for months to come. And I think, when we look at helping, we often look at kind of choosing one nonprofit that you really believe in the work that they're doing, and trying to support their work long term. Because I think, just giving, my method of giving is instead of giving $25 to 30 different organizations, trying to go a mile deep and really support one organization long term, so they can continue to do this work over what will likely be many years of recovery here.
I want to ask you all for some advice for some of these students. I know that one of my students in particular who's on this call is a journalism student, but really wants to be a documentary filmmaker. So what advice do you have for students who are in that position? And do you have any advice that's specific to this kind of time of quarantine?
Yes. I mean, normally my advice is just get started. I think like it's scary, it's overwhelming, but I can't tell you how many incredible documentary films are made by first-time filmmakers. I can't tell you how many bad films we've made to get to where we are. It's just, you have to get started. Like that is, even if you've been in school for years, like you just have to start writing, you have to start making a film. It's the only way that you're going to get better. Like truly is the only way. And that can happen right now. I mean, I think there are so many creative ways of still telling stories during this moment. Finding found footage, finding, different opportunities to have people film themselves, we actually have a really flourishing TikTok these days, because TikTok is a platform where people, it is called Optimist Films, The Optimist. Sorry, we just changed it. It's called The Optimist, and it's like a platform where like it's expected to have stories through phones. So we tell the stories of like incredible people through like these, minute long, and it actually is still a process of like storytelling, even though it's like a funny way of doing it. But people just film themselves at home, and we have tens of thousands of followers on TikTok. But I think it's just being creative, like pushing yourself. Like there's a million different ways to tell a story. It doesn't have to be the way that we tell a story. And it's also a really good time to develop these like really early seedlings of ideas, right? So we'll come up with hundreds of ideas for a film, and one will kind of work out. And it's just about kind of like germinating those little seeds of ideas and understanding, okay, what do we have access to? How is this going to, how are we going to build that access into more of a story, and just reaching out to people, because we're all at home. We all want to talk to someone. Like the first step in kind of understanding, the character or the story is by talking to them. So it's actually a great time to jump on a Skype call or a, Zoom call and actually get things going. But I mean, just get things going is kind of my philosophy on life.
Should we take this 1 minute to just answer the 3 questions that didn't get answered? So one is when the film will be available. We're trying really hard to get it out right now. The best thing that we'd love from you guys, if you're interested in seeing the film and you potentially want to host a virtual screening, if you can email us and let us know that's amazing. We can then let you know, when it'll be available virtually. We're going to do one on May 15th to May 25th. We'll be live streaming it as a part of a film festival, so we can kind of send you that info. Please, email us and let us know that. You can email chris@optimist.co or zach@optimist.co. Our emails are on our website, everything. Some of these other ones are a little bit more complicated. How do you compensate your subjects of your film without influencing or changing their lives? That's a huge question in documentary, of whether or not people should be compensated. Oftentimes the big celebrities get paid, people like Lady Gaga, yet the small subjects don't. So it's something that, you should read a lot of the materials on. We do not compensate subjects like, in actual payment for being a part of the film. They do often benefit in the end of the film. And then if they have to miss work, for example, we will, pay for that missed time or something like that throughout the process. And then the last one, Nina from earlier, and Judy and Luis consider one another as adversaries. One thing that was really interesting was Judy and Luis, they didn't immediately hate each other. Luis wasn't vitriolic towards ICE. He has a couple comments in his interviews about, well, they're just doing their job and they're doing what they're supposed to. And in some ways it was, his limited understanding of the complexities of ICE. But I don't think he held an immediate hatred. I think he was, he's been interested in learning more throughout the process. And I think we may end up doing some virtual events where we have Judy and Luis actually talk to one another and ask each other questions, because they're populations that rarely get to, get the chance to speak with one another. I think that was all the questions. Anyone have anything else? If not, just, come to our website, check it out, follow us on social, and we're really excited to share these new films with you guys.
And I think that Outspoken is going to be, oh, there's Tori. Maybe I'm saying exactly what you're about to say, but Outspoken, I'm sure, is going to be sending information out to everybody who's on this call about how to actually see the film.
Great.
Yes, we will absolutely. We have this recording. We will be putting this together on YouTube so that you can have access to watch things again, share with your friends and family, colleagues, other students, teachers, and we will also share in the email, along with the links, some resources. Some of the links and videos that Chris and Zach spoke about will include access to their Instagram channel and maybe their TikTok as well, so that you guys can follow along. I'm not as hip to the TikTok situation, but certainly is.
I love it. I'm obsessed.
Really. You what?
I'm obsessed. I love TikTok.
Are you? Okay. Yeah.
Like
I
Vine.
know that.
I don't know if you experience Vine, but it's like Vine for the new kids, I guess.
Yeah, I saw a hilarious video where it was this one comedian playing the part of every social media platform, and Vine was like the one that was popped on at the very end. It was pretty funny. But yeah, we will definitely get you their TikTok username and Instagram and everything else. But it looks like Chris froze and left us. But thank you so much, Zach. And we'll tell Chris for sure, and Ashton, for hosting this conversation today. Amazing bits of information about all the films. And I know from my experience watching 5 Years North that that's really something that everyone has to look forward to, feel very connected with all those characters. So really excited for you guys to have your chance to actually premiere that to the rest of the world very soon.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So with that, we thank you again so much for coming, and we will have an email out to you soon with more information. And next week, we will have another Candid Conversations on Thursday. We'll send you a link in that email to register if you'd like. It'll be with our friend Jesse Israel of The Big Quiet. We'll be talking in conversation about the power of connection, these stressors and anxieties we're living through right now, and then he will lead a short meditation with us. So we hope you can join us then. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.